Today, we're diving into something that's getting a lot of attention, but not enough real discussion. The Strait of Hormuz is the narrow waterway that carries about 20% of the world's daily oil supply. After the U.S. and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury on February 28th, Iran tried to disrupt shipping there with mines and attacks on tankers. Trump called on allies to help keep the strait open and secure. The response from many NATO members and key partners like Japan has been basically, no thanks, not our fight. This isn't just a one-off disagreement. It's a test of the alliance at a moment when the U.S. has already done the heavy lifting. Let's walk through exactly what happened in the war so far, what each country has said, what Trump has warned them, and the very real consequences these countries could face if the U.S. decides to pull back support in the future. First, a quick recap of the timeline, so we're all on the same page. The operation started February 28th with near-simultaneous U.S. and Israeli strikes authorized from Air Force One. The first wave hit command centers in Tehran. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in his compound, along with dozens of top IRGC leaders, including commanders like Mohammad Pakpour, Aziz Nazirzadeh, Ali Shamkhani, and Mohammad Bagheri. Within the first 12 to 24 hours, air defenses, missile launch sites, storage facilities, and nuclear-related infrastructure were struck hard. Iranian retaliatory barges were largely intercepted. Then the focus shifted to the Navy. Over the next several days, more than 100 Iranian naval vessels, warships, mine layers, and support ships were sunk or disabled around the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Missile and drone production and launch capability were reduced by roughly 90% and 95% respectively through repeated strikes on manufacturing plants and depots. The total number of targets hit exceeded 7,000 across more than 17 provinces. Iran suffered over 1,400 confirmed military deaths, with civilian claims higher but harder to verify. That's the backdrop. The U.S. and Israel achieved rapid conventional degradation without a long ground war. Now, when Trump asked for help securing the Strait of Hormuz to keep oil flowing, the responses from key allies were pretty consistent in their reluctance. Let's start with the UK. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said at a news conference that the UK was not at the point of decisions yet and made it clear they would not be drawn into offensive operations. He emphasized that the UK had no involvement in the initial strikes. Trump responded directly, calling the UK uncooperative and saying, "This is not Winston Churchill we're dealing with." In a Truth Social post and Oval Office comments, Trump said the U.S. no longer needs or desires NATO assistance if allies won't help when asked. He warned that a negative response would be very bad for the future of NATO.
At the beginning of this conflict, I made it really clear that we wouldn't join the offensive strikes that the US and Israel were carrying out on Iran. We've got about 300,000 British nationals in the Gulf region, and it's important that we protect them and our Gulf allies. So we have got the RAF in particular flying aeroplanes across the region. They're actually intercepting strikes to stop them hitting people and buildings. So that's defensive action. But we're not joining the war. We are allowing the US to use our bases, but again for defensive, collective self-defense to take out basically the ability of Iran to put missiles into the air that are going or may go to attack our Gulf allies and our people in the Gulf. So not going to war, simply taking necessary defensive action to protect British lives and British.
The UK is one of the countries that benefits heavily from stable Gulf oil flows because of its refining capacity and energy imports. If the strait stays contested, UK fuel prices spike, hitting households and industry hard. If Trump reduces US commitment to NATO, the UK loses the automatic security guarantee that has been central to its defense posture since World War II. That means higher defense spending, less intelligence sharing, and greater vulnerability in the North Atlantic. France took an even firmer line. President Emmanuel Macron stated clearly that France will never take part in operations to open or liberate the Strait of Hormuz in the current context. He said France is ready to help with escort missions only once the situation is calmer.
Nombre des pays de la région. Je le redis ici, la France n'a pas choisi cette guerre. Nous ne prenons pas part et nous avons une position purement défensive en protection de nos ressortissants, en soutien de nos alliés. Nos objectifs sont clairs. Ils sont définis depuis le premier jour, ils n'ont pas changé. Le premier, c'est de protéger nos ressortissants, nos emprises diplomatiques et militaires, et nos intérêts dans la région. Le deuxième objectif est de nous tenir aux côtés de l'ensemble de nos partenaires, ceux avec qui nous sommes liés par des accords de défense, aux côtés desquels nous œuvrons souvent pour la lutte contre le terrorisme, la sécurité et la stabilité régionale. Et donc nous avons honoré notre parole, nous continuons de l'honorer, nous sommes des partenaires loyaux et nous leur avons apporté un soutien très clair depuis le début, qui est de les aider à protéger leur propre population.
Trump expressed disappointment in Macron's stance and included France in his broader criticism of allies who benefit from secure sea lanes but won't contribute. France imports a significant portion of its oil through the strait. Prolonged disruption means higher energy costs for French industry and households. If the U.S. steps back from NATO, France loses the integrated command structure and the U.S. nuclear umbrella that has protected Europe for decades. France would have to accelerate its own military modernization and spend more while dealing with energy price shocks. Germany has been equally cautious. Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said the conflict has nothing to do with NATO, and this is not our war. We did not start it. Germany has been hesitant to meet the 2% spending target for years. If the strait remains unstable, Germany's export-driven economy takes a direct hit because higher oil prices raise costs for cars, chemicals, and everything they sell abroad. If Trump reduces America's role in NATO, Germany loses the American troops stationed there, shared intelligence, and the collective defense guarantee. Germany would suddenly face much higher defense budgets at the same time as energy insecurity. Japan, though not a NATO member, is a major U.S. treaty ally. Japanese officials, including Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi, have said they have not received a formal request but are not considering sending escort ships at this time due to legal and policy constraints. Japan imports nearly all its oil, with a large share coming through the strait. Any disruption hits their economy immediately. Trump has pointed out that countries like Japan benefit enormously from secure sea lanes but are not stepping up. If the U.S. questions alliances over lack of reciprocity, Japan could see reduced American naval presence in the Pacific and pressure to spend more on its own defense against China. Trump has linked this directly to the Ukraine situation as well. In recent comments, he has said Europe must take on more of the burden for its own security and that the U.S. has been carrying too much of the load in Ukraine. He has repeatedly warned that NATO is becoming a one-way street, where the U.S. protects allies but they don't help when America asks. EU leaders have pushed back on this. Several, including those from France, Germany, and the UK, have emphasized that NATO is a defensive alliance and the Iran conflict is not a NATO mission. At the same time, they have expressed concern about Trump's threats to reduce U.S. support. The tension is clear. Europe wants continued U.S. backing for Ukraine, but is reluctant to commit naval assets to the Strait of Hormuz. Now let's talk about the real consequences these countries could face if Trump follows through and reduces America's role in NATO or questions the alliance's value. Energy security comes first. Europe and Japan are far more dependent on Gulf oil than the United States. Prolonged disruption in the strait means sustained higher oil prices. That translates into higher fuel costs for households, higher production costs for factories, and slower economic growth. Germany and Japan, as major exporters, would feel this particularly hard. Defense spending is the next big hit. Many NATO countries are still below or barely at the 2% GDP target. They have relied on the U.S. as the backbone of the alliance. If the U.S. steps back, those countries have to fill the gap themselves. That means large new investments in navies, air forces, missiles, and personnel, spending that comes at a time when budgets are already strained by energy costs. Strategic vulnerability increases. Without the full U.S. security umbrella, Europe becomes more exposed to Russia in the East and the Mediterranean. Japan becomes more exposed to China in the Pacific. The collective defense guarantee that has kept the peace since 1949 starts to look less reliable. Countries that refuse to help secure a vital global choke point would find it harder to call on the U.S. when their own security is threatened later. Intelligence and technology sharing could shrink. The U.S. provides the majority of advanced intelligence, satellite data, and high-tech systems to these allies. If trust erodes over something as basic as keeping oil flowing, that cooperation can be scaled back, leaving allies with less visibility into threats and slower access to cutting-edge equipment. Economic ripple effects are long-term. Higher oil prices and bigger defense budgets mean less money for healthcare, infrastructure, and green energy projects. For export-driven economies like Germany and Japan, this can trigger slower growth or even recessions that last for years. Trump has been direct about all of this in recent days. In interviews and posts, he said the U.S. no longer needs or desires NATO assistance if allies won't help when asked. He warned that a negative response would be very bad for the future of NATO.